Hello YouTube, it's Salams. I wanted to introduce this next video. I recorded it a couple weeks ago on my phone, so when you see it, it's going to look really narrow. This is my new webcam, very exciting. But I just wanted to say this video is basically my journey towards deciding to have top surgery. It was a complicated process. For me, it was a very spiritual process. There were a lot of spiritual questions that needed to be answered, a lot of difficult things that I had to challenge in myself, a lot of internalized transphobia that I had to challenge in myself. So the story talks about kind of dysphoria throughout my life, but then really gets into some of those blocks that stopped me for a couple of years, that really kept me from moving forward with this huge step. I'm gonna zip over to that video now. I do pop back in later, so FYI, but I hope this is helpful.
Howdy, howdy. Shalom's here. I want to talk about what made me decide to have surgery. I have known for many, many years that I was uncomfortable with my chest, didn't feel right, really ever. For a few years there, learned that having a chest made me attractive to people. Like, this was years ago, like when I was quite young. And so because of that, I started valuing my chest. And part of me really liked it because it got me attention. But it wasn't an internal liking. You know, I didn't feel that it was necessarily right on my body. I just knew that it got me the attention that I wanted. And as I got older, I always had the feeling of my chest doesn't feel good. I don't like this about my body, but I didn't think there was anything you could do about it. Just like, okay, I guess this is just how I feel. I remember when I was young, I actually used to wear, when I first got breasts, basically when I was like 12 or whatever, they were big. And I really hated the idea of wearing a bra, so I refused to. Until my grandmother, like my mom tried to talk to me about it, and I was like, not into that. And then my mom got my grandma to talk to me, because my grandma and I were very close. And she managed to get through to me. And so I started wearing a bra. But I always felt very disconnected from my chest, even at that age. When I was in high school, I used to wear a bra to bed every night, because I hated the feeling of having this part of my body like moving around. It just didn't feel good to have. I felt like not having a bra on drew my attention more to my breasts, and I hated that feeling. It was an awful feeling. And so wearing a bra to bed kept everything contained, and it felt better. And I remember when I was in high school, I would have sleepovers with friends and wear a bra to bed, and they all thought I was crazy, you know. And this came up so many times, and like my friends teased me about this. I mean, you know, lovingly, but they teased me about it, and this became like a real thing. Like, oh, so and so wears their bra to bed, blah blah blah. Anyway, but I did for many, 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 many years, even beyond that. And then I still felt uncomfortable. I always felt that like regular bras like accentuated my chest, and I hated that. And I have a very big chest, and so the bras just made it look really big, and it was just even worse. And so I found that wearing sports bras actually kind of toned down the size. And so I started wearing sports bras all the time, and that actually felt better. And I did this without the knowledge that even people binded or used sports bras as a way to sort of bind. I didn't know that even existed. I just found it on my own. So I started wearing sports bras all the time. I just stopped wearing regular bras completely because they just they accentuated that part of my body. And so when I began to think about my gender, started questioning my gender identity, my chest was really one of the first pieces that I started thinking about. I should pause actually and say, a year prior to thinking about my gender identity, I was in a photo shoot for this theater group that was a part of. I was wearing a tuxedo, and it was drag. I was trying to do drag. And so I wanted to look as male as possible. And so I tried to bind, and I used an ace bandage that day. And this was my first attempt at actual binding with the knowledge that I was trying to like eliminate the size. So that was like my first attempt at binding. It was painful, and I do not recommend doing that. It's very unhealthy. I did it it was only a few hours. It was very uncomfortable, and it's very unhealthy. So I do not do that if you're going to bind, use a binder. We could talk about that another time. But I will actually put links down below where you can get binders. Do not use an ace bandage. Okay. But I did for a few hours. And it felt good to have my chest under control, you know, and like be able to wear like this tuxedo jacket and feel really good about myself. So that was kind of the first attempt that I made at like really concealing my chest. And then the following year, when I started having thoughts about gender, one of the first things that came to mind was my chest and how I was always trying to wear men's clothes and they didn't fit me. And in order to make them fit, I always had to buy shirts that were like way too big. I was trying to figure out how to deal with it. So I learned about binding and I started binding on the weekends, and it felt great. It was just huge. It was such a huge experience to start binding, and it felt so good. And then eventually I started binding all the time. And so it's almost 2 years now that I've been binding all the time. But, you know, throughout all of this, I was thinking about having top surgery. And I was like, man, could I ever do that? And part of me really wanted it. But I had a lot of reservations about it and a lot of fears. So there were a few things stopping me. I would say, first off, it felt like very extreme. And I was fearful that, like, what if I changed my mind later? And so there was a part of me that really needed to become sure that this is what I wanted. Then there was a piece of me that was fearful about like what I would look like. So that was more of like more of a fear-based concern. What if it looks bad? You know, that kind of thing. So kind of aesthetically, I was worried. One of the biggest things that I struggled with was just, I think this is really more of a conceptual thing, but do I have a right to alter my body from a spiritual perspective? Now, FYI, I have a long background in spirituality. I went to seminary, so I was trained to be a minister. And so I've done a lot of deep work in the spiritual world and the religious world. And it's a big deal for me. You know, it's a big deal to know that my choices are aligned with, not with a religion, but with like a spiritual higher power, basically.
Hello. I am editing this video and I feel like I left out a really big thing that I want to just pop in and say real quick. Transphobia was a huge part of this. Transphobia was a huge part, internalized transphobia. I was afraid to admit that, I think. And I don't even think I knew what was going on. But for a long time, I had this internal messaging that, you know, trans people aren't real. I hate to say that out loud, but that's what the messaging was that I had gotten over the years. That it was a choice. Ugh, I hate saying it, but that's true. That was the messaging I got. And no one ever told me dysphoria isn't real, but that was sort of the impression that was kind of left on me, right? That all of these feelings just aren't real, and if trans people would just deal with their feelings, then they wouldn't need to transition, and they should be happy in their own bodies. And that this was like very intense messaging that I received for many years before starting to recognize that I had my own gender stuff. Oh, again, I hate saying it, but that's true. It was a big thing, and a lot of the transphobia is connected to what I'm about to talk about, which is all the spiritual questions. They're so intertwined, it's almost impossible to disconnect them. But I just wanted to pop in and name that. A big piece of me being able to move forward in my transition has been unraveling and looking at this transphobia and dealing with each of these sort of accusations that were in my brain. And I'm still dealing with it. I mean, transphobia is so deep. It is so deep. But that is definitely a big piece of why it took me so long to have top surgery. Was I, in my heart, believed that I should just be able to deal with these feelings of dysphoria, and this whole trans thing isn't really real. And that I was somehow just taking part in some kind of fad or something like that. Ugh. Yeah, all of that. It was a big block. And like I said, it's connected to everything I'm about to say. But the spiritual stuff is very real in and of itself. But it is connected to the transphobia. So there you go.
And I did not have a concept of God as being the kind of God that would create people and make it so that they needed to change their bodies to become whole. My understanding was that God creates us and we're whole. The idea that I would need to change my body felt like an offense to God. Like, God created me perfectly, and me making a change is playing God, basically. I could not get past this. Should I not just learn to deal with the body that I've been given and adjust my thinking and my emotions to cope with? Maybe this was kind of my cross to bear, that, you know, I was given this body that I don't feel at home in, but maybe it's my calling to learn how to be okay the way that I was made. And by getting surgery, I'm actually stepping in the way of what my calling is. And I'm saying, no, I'm changing my fate, if you will. And I didn't feel like I had the right to do that. I was looking for stories in the Bible, you know, in scripture, historical myths, anything. I was looking for some place to justify this action. I was trying to find a character in history who had to change their body to become whole. And I couldn't find anything. And so I was just like, well, I don't see any stories of this. Like, and when I say stories, I mean, there's a lot of individuals, humans that I know, like, who have done this. But when I'm talking about mythologically, like scripture, that kind of story, that I could basically like hang my story on and say, okay, this is what I'm doing, and it's okay that I'm doing this. I think that's really what it was if I found a story in the Bible, in some other tradition, it didn't matter what the tradition was, that would have made me feel justified in making this change to my body. But I couldn't find anything. And so I was like, this was my struggle for a while. And I mean, for a while, I mean for 2 years. And I kept going back and forth between, do I just need to cope with this body, or how do I move forward? How do I make this decision? Anyway, so I was struggling. And then finally I went on this retreat. So there's this really awesome retreat in Northern California called Transmission. It happens twice a year. If you're around, I highly recommend checking it out. It's a great transmasculine, trans male retreat. Wonderful, reflective time, fun time. Just great way to connect with community. And I went for my first retreat in August. I had this experience throughout the weekend, I heard people talking about their stories of getting top surgery and their experiences of the freedom that came from that. And like over and over and over again, that was the story that I heard. And I hear that on YouTube, you know, the stories that I hear on YouTube, same thing. Stories of how top surgery created so much freedom. That really spoke to me. And there was this one moment where I was in community with all these trans folks, thinking about all these stories, and there was just this moment where I was just like, everyone here is sharing the same story. And in a way, this is actually scripture, if you think about it. In UCC, which is United Church of Christ, what they say is God is still speaking, which means that scripture doesn't end with the Bible. Like, the Bible is not the end of our inspired literature. We are continuously listening for God every day, all the time. And I kind of just felt like in that moment, you know, surrounded by all these trans men with these experiences, I was just like, this is God still speaking. God is speaking through every person's story, every person who shared that they experienced freedom as a result of this surgery. This is God speaking. Like, this is the story I'm looking for. It's actually all around me. It's present day. It's not necessarily in history. No, I can't find it written in a holy book, but it's around me. It's surrounding me. It was like, oh, here it is. This is the permission I was looking for, to feel the holiness, the sacredness in everyone's experience. It just suddenly felt like, oh, okay, it is absolutely okay for me to do this, to change my body, to become more myself. And I feel permission because I can see freedom around me. And that is God. And it was really that experience that just suddenly I was okay with it. And I felt like I became right with God in that moment. I feel like I have permission. I have permission. I have examples and I have permission. And it really made a huge difference for me. And something another person said to me that helped as well. Along the way, I've had a lot of questions about this and have said, like, well, why would God make a mistake? And a lot of people say, well, I don't feel like I am a mistake. I feel like it's my fate. It's my journey. It's my calling to be a trans person. God didn't accidentally put me in this body. God put me in this body on purpose so that I could go through the process of transition. And I thought that was really beautiful. And it really speaks to me. Because I don't think God does make mistakes. And I think God calls us to do courageous things and scary things. And right now, that's what my calling is to continue to step forward into this authenticity and truth that is being so clearly put in front of me. I mean, I have a belief that if I'm following God's path, God's will, there is freedom on the other side. And when I think about top surgery, I have an enormous sense of freedom. And that's the story I've heard from every person who has had top surgery that I've talked to, no matter how they identify. That makes me know that this is the right thing. So I hope that's helpful. I'm really open to talk about this. So if you want to dialogue, please feel free to leave a comment. Love to talk more. But I hope this was helpful for someone.